America entered this war with roughly 8,000 defense missiles. Iran holds 45,000. And right now, deep military sources are leaking a chilling truth. The Pentagon is scraping the bottom of the barrel. You turn on the news and hear that Iran is crippled? That is a lie. The brutal reality on the battlefield is this. Every time a United States general steps to the podium to declare an enemy launcher destroyed, a 1,000-pound Iranian warhead rips through the sky and hits dead center. The United States is panicking so badly that they are hastily ripping THAAD radar systems out of South Korea, leaving the Asian powder keg wide open, just in a desperate attempt to shield Israel. Meanwhile, Omani ports are burning, the Strait of Hormuz is actively being mined, and the U.S. Secretary of Energy is quietly deleting reassuring tweets just hours after posting them. Forget the flashy primetime headlines. What you are about to hear is the terrifying, unvarnished truth of how the world's sole superpower walked blindly into a perfect strategic trap. Here is the brilliant asymmetrical calculus that Iran figured out at the very beginning of this catastrophic conflict. You do not win a modern war by throwing your entire arsenal at the enemy all at once. You win by making your enemy genuinely believe they are winning, all while you bleed them slowly and methodically. When Iran fired massive numbers of missiles at the very inception of this conflict, the objective was not necessarily to destroy specific targets. The true strategic objective was to entirely drain the enemy's highly expensive, deeply limited anti-missile stockpiles. Israel, the wealthy Gulf states, the mighty United States Navy, all of them burned through their advanced missile defense reserves in a frantic attempt to shoot down that massive first wave. The consequence of that panic is playing out right now on the global stage. America is currently rushing THAAD radar systems and vital interceptor missiles all the way from South Korea to Israel. I want you to really think about the gravity of that geopolitical maneuver. The United States, ostensibly the most powerful military force on Earth, is being forced to pull critical air defense systems out of South Korea, one of the most volatile, highly tense nuclear flashpoints on the entire planet, just to protect Israel from Iran. That is not the sign of a military campaign that is going well. That is the glaring red warning sign of a global military apparatus that is stretched to its absolute breaking point. While the entire world watches the missile counts and blindly debates whether Iran's launch capability has significantly dropped, Tehran is quietly, ruthlessly winning a completely different war in the shadows. We are witnessing the devastating reality of the drone war. Vital ports are burning in Oman, critical infrastructure across the Gulf is under relentless attack, and emergency alerts are going out across the entire region. None of this destruction requires a single ballistic missile. All of it is being executed with highly effective drones, and the chilling truth is that Iran's massive domestic drone manufacturing capacity has not been touched by Western strikes. That fact matters far more than the pundits realize because the Strait of Hormuz, the global economic jugular through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes, does not need a single ballistic missile to be effectively threatened. It only needs drones, and Iran possesses thousands of them. But the situation is rapidly evolving into something far more extreme than drone swarms. Major reports from CNN, CBS, and ABC are now claiming that Iran has actively begun mining the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. If this intelligence is true, this is no longer just a localized threat to regional oil shipping. This is a direct existential threat to the entire global economy. The panic in Washington is palpable. The United States Secretary of Energy initially put out a tweet claiming that United States naval ships were actively escorting commercial tankers through the dangerous waters of the Persian Gulf. That revealing tweet was abruptly deleted within hours. You can draw your own dark conclusions about what that redaction means regarding America's actual confidence in securing those waters. Let us pull back the curtain and examine the real military picture, because the raw numbers and logistical realities are far worse than what you are being shown on cable news. The United States Army today is a mere shadow, a fraction of what it was 30 years ago. Back in 1991, America possessed an active force of 800,000 soldiers and was logistically capable of deploying 300,000 of them to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait for the Gulf War. That overwhelming projection of conventional capability no longer exists. Today, the Marines are lightly equipped and the Army is severely understaffed. Furthermore, the very nature of modern warfare has fundamentally transformed. As the brutal conflict in Ukraine has definitively shown the entire world, ground forces are now nearly useless unless they operate under the umbrella of total control of the airspace above them. Think about what that absolute requirement means for any hawkish scenario involving American boots on the ground near Iran. Iran is a massive, formidable fortress of a country, stretching nearly 1,000 miles across at its widest point, and its mountainous terrain is notoriously brutal. Just like Russia and Ukraine, Iran possesses persistent satellite surveillance capabilities that track everything that moves on the ground. Any American military buildup would be instantly spotted by Tehran long before it even started. Vulnerable transport ships carrying troops and heavy equipment would be targeted and sunk before they ever had the chance to unload at a port. The slow, methodical military buildup of 1990 that worked so perfectly against Saddam Hussein's Iraq would be an absolute massacre today. We also need to address a critical dimension of this escalating conflict that almost nobody in the Western media is covering with the honesty it demands. Recently, Israel conducted a strike against an Iranian desalination plant. On the surface, this might seem significant, but Iran possesses over 30 desalination plants, as well as multiple natural river sources, meaning the strike did not actually cripple Iran's domestic water supply. But here is the incredibly dangerous asymmetrical reality. The neighboring Gulf states absolutely desperately need their desalination plants to survive. For these desert nations, these facilities are not a luxury. They are the fundamental backbone of their survival infrastructure. And Iran has already demonstrated its willingness to cross that red line, striking at least one desalination facility in the Gulf in direct retaliation. If this tit-for-tat dynamic escalates further, and if Iran decides to begin targeting Gulf desalination plants systematically, entire populations in that wealthy region will face an immediate, catastrophic humanitarian water crisis. The diplomatic chaos is matching the military chaos. Israel also reportedly struck Iranian oil depots and allegedly did so without securing American approval. Immediately afterward, the Jerusalem Post published a highly controversial story claiming that the United Arab Emirates was actually the one striking Iranian targets. The UAE was furious, immediately issuing a stark denial. So, analyze the board. You have Israel striking sensitive infrastructure that could easily trigger a Gulf-wide humanitarian crisis, elements publishing false intelligence stories that attempt to drag neutral Gulf states directly into the line of fire, and all of this is happening while America continues to fund, supply, and defend the operations. The ultimate question you should be asking yourself right now is this: who is actually driving this war, and in whose ultimate interest is it truly being fought? You will never get that kind of deep geopolitical context from a sanitized 2-minute segment on evening television. Now we arrive at the absolute most dangerous part of this entire geopolitical unraveling. Historically, Iran's previous supreme leader had issued a strict binding religious ruling against the development of nuclear weapons. That leader is now dead, assassinated in a targeted Israeli strike that did not just kill him, but also systematically wiped out his son, his wife, his daughter-in-law, his grandchildren, and multiple other members of his close family. His newly installed successor, a figure who was already considered far more hawkish and critical of the United States before this escalation began, has now had to watch his predecessor's entire bloodline be erased. The strategic lesson that every single military and intelligence analyst watching this conflict is drawing is both stark and incredibly simple. Countries without nuclear weapons are inherently vulnerable to regime change and decapitation strikes. Countries with nuclear weapons are not. Look at the historical precedents. North Korea possesses nuclear weapons. Nobody is launching airstrikes against North Korea. Libya voluntarily gave up its weapons program to appease the West. Muammar Gaddafi is dead. Iraq did not actually have weapons of mass destruction. Iraq was brutally invaded anyway. The leadership in Tehran is watching all of this unfold, and the powerful voices inside Iran's national security establishment are now almost certainly echoing one dominant thought. This would never have happened to us if we possessed nuclear weapons. If Iran makes the fateful decision to move toward building a nuclear weapon, and their survival motivation has never been stronger in modern history, the dominoes will fall rapidly. Saudi Arabia has already clearly signaled to the world that it will immediately follow suit. Then Turkey will demand its own deterrent, followed by Egypt. In the blink of an eye, the entire Middle East goes nuclear. And what exactly does America do then? What does Israel do then? This is the true, terrifying endgame that absolutely nobody in Washington is planning for. Why? Because there is no plan. There has never been a coherent long-term plan. There was only a tactical target to destroy Iran, but absolutely no grand strategy for managing the apocalyptic landscape of what comes after. And here is the part of this cascading failure that will eventually hit the wallet of every single person listening to this analysis, regardless of whether you care about the politics of the Middle East or not. The economic shockwaves are already tearing through global markets. Energy prices in Europe have skyrocketed by 70 to 90%. Over in Asia, an industrial powerhouse that draws the vast majority of its critical oil from the Gulf, prices are up 50 to 100%. Let us look at the key players. Japan gets roughly 72% of its oil directly from the Gulf. South Korea relies on the region for around 65 to 66% of its supply. Both of these nations are cornerstone American allies, and both of them are absolutely furious at the current state of affairs. We are seeing a massive disruption across the board. Industrial goods, electricity costs, global monetary policy, everything downstream of energy is being violently disrupted. Currency volatility has reached extreme unprecedented levels, tearing into a global economy that was already incredibly fragile before a single bomb was even dropped in this new conflict. If you trace the money, the geopolitical irony is staggering. The only two countries on Earth that have actually financially benefited from this massive disruption to Gulf oil are Russia, which is now happily selling its own oil at premium prices to desperate countries cut off from the Gulf supply, and the United States, particularly through highly lucrative natural gas exports to a freezing Europe. Let that dark reality sink in for a moment. America went to war in the Middle East, and as a direct result, its closest historical allies got severely economically hurt, while its primary geopolitical enemies got vastly richer. President Trump now finds himself backed into a corner, facing what may very well be the single most difficult, high-stakes political decision of his entire presidency. The standard playbook says he can try to seek a diplomatic off-ramp, find a face-saving way to de-escalate tensions, declare some subjective version of victory to the press, and pull American forces back from the brink. His political record suggests he is pragmatic enough to be willing to do this. He has successfully found off-ramps in previous crises. However, the fatal flaw in that plan is that Iran has already publicly stated that it will not negotiate. Tehran's message to Washington is clear and unyielding. You bombed us, so you do not get to broker a convenient deal now. This puts the alliance in a fatal bind, because without continuous, massive United States logistical and military support, Israel faces a multi-front war of attrition that it mathematically cannot win alone. So what exactly happens if America tries to pragmatically leave, but Israel refuses to stop fighting? What happens if the Iranian ballistic missiles keep flying relentlessly toward Israeli cities, and the United States is no longer there to cover the massive widening defense gap? Here is the grim consensus that serious military analysts are quietly whispering in the corridors of power. America cannot simply disengage. The domestic political cost of walking away and seemingly abandoning Israel is considered entirely too high. The United States Congress, massive sectors of the financial industry, and much of the mainstream media are all deeply, structurally connected to Israeli interests. Any American president who attempts to truly pull back faces enormous, likely insurmountable political consequences at home. This is the ultimate geopolitical trap. The war is going badly, the diplomatic off-ramp is firmly blocked by Tehran, and the only military alternative currently being seriously discussed by hawks putting American boots on the ground to seize Iran's Karg Island, the vital hub where over 90% of Iranian oil is refined, is an action that every single serious military analyst says would be catastrophically disastrous. America simply does not have the troop numbers available. It absolutely does not have the massive logistics required, and the lethal realities of modern warfare would inevitably turn any such amphibious operation into a historic military disaster before the first transport ships even left their staging areas. The hard truth we must face is that the old Middle East order, the fragile architecture built a century ago after World War I, when Britain and France arrogantly drew the map of the region, is entirely finished. The long era of unquestioned American military dominance in the waters of the Persian Gulf is definitively over. This is not happening because America was decisively defeated in a single massive battle, but because the wealthy Gulf states have now watched America fight at its full available strength and completely failed to protect them from the fallout. They have watched the ballistic missiles hitting vital Gulf infrastructure. They have seen the critical ports burning. They know their desalination plants are under existential threat, and they have watched the mighty United States Navy sailing away from the perilous strait rather than charging into it. Because even the admirals of the Navy know deep down that their multi-billion-dollar vessels are highly vulnerable to cheap drone swarms and advanced precision missiles. The Gulf states are watching all of this play out in real time, and they are drawing cold, hard conclusions. The definitive conclusion they are drawing is that America can no longer protect us, which means that whoever ultimately steps in to replace American influence in the Gulf, whether that is a rising China, an emboldened Russia, or a new independent regional security arrangement built around the countries that actually live there, will absolutely not include America as the dominant dictating power. Russia emerges from this stronger than it was before this conflict began. China is watching carefully from the sidelines, taking notes on American weakness. And Iran, despite being bombed, economically devastated, with thousands of its civilians tragically killed, and its ancient cities scarred by war, has not surrendered, has not capitulated, and has not agreed to a single American demand. We must remember that this is Persia, a deep, proud civilization that has been around for over 2,700 years. It has weathered and survived empires far greater than ours. And there is one more vital thing that we must address, because almost nobody is talking about the interconnected nature of global conflict. While the media and the politicians have all their eyes totally fixated on Iran, the grinding war in Ukraine is still happening, and Russia is steadily winning it. Russia's domestic economy has been dramatically strengthened by high global oil revenues. Europe, meanwhile, is significantly poorer, colder, and more politically divided than at any point in recent decades. The mounting pressure on European governments from their own angry populations, citizens who are now paying 70 to 90% more for basic energy and who never wanted to bear the cost of this war, is becoming impossible for their leaders to ignore. Military analysts now firmly believe that Russia will take the critical port city of Odessa before the end of this year. If that strategic disaster happens, what is left of the state of Ukraine will have absolutely no outlet to the sea. It immediately becomes a landlocked, economically strangled, militarily exhausted rump state, completely dependent on whatever harsh terms Russia is ultimately willing to offer. The vast, unintended consequences of the war with Iran may very well end the war in Ukraine, but certainly not in the victorious way that Washington initially intended. History is full of tragic moments when a powerful nation became so blindingly focused on one specific fight that it completely lost sight of the larger global picture. World War II ended with half the world trapped under communism, not because that was the original grand plan, but because no one was watching the entire geopolitical board while they focused solely on the bloody battle directly in front of them. We may be watching exactly that kind of historic empire-ending moment unfold right before our eyes today.